Hello, everybody. Hopefully, we are now live. We're going live on Facebook and you're able to find us. I am Julie Flygare. I'm the president and CEO of Project Sleep. And I'm so excited because we have a very special guest with us to kick off the Sleep In 2021, Dr. Shelby Harris. Hi, Shelby. Hi, Dr.
Hi,
Harris.
Julie. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for being part of the Sleep In 2021.
Excited. Thank
So, folks, as you're tuning in, please share where you are tuning in from. It's really fun to see where people are. I know, obviously, our friends in Australia have already probably tucked in for the night, but we maybe have a few in Europe still awake and across the US. So, thank you guys for all of your participation in the sleep in already. I just wanted to quickly uh, give a shout out to all of our fundraisers because the sleep-in has just started and we're at 95% to our goal of raising $10,000
you. Oh my
just
God.
by staying in bed, guys. Just raising money from our beds. So that's pretty incredible. Your participation has already been, I've already cried about it a few times this week, so I'll try not to right now. It's been so meaningful and it's just so amazing to see this event take off. This is our 7th year and so we're really, really excited for the weekend. And I just wanted to mention that I'll be interviewing Dr. Harris today. And if you know you have any questions, you can put them into the Facebook. In general, we're doing this for education and awareness purposes. And so we probably won't get to individual questions about your medical situation. You should probably bring those to your doctor. But in general, if you have questions, please do put them into the chat and we'll try to get to some of those as well. But I have a lot of questions. So Dr. Harris is a psychologist and a board certified behavioral sleep medicine doctor. Is that correct? Did I say it
Special. Yeah.
correctly?
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
Specialist.
Yeah.
And she's also a fellow Brown grad.
Go
Shout
Brown.
out. Go Brown. And so I'm trying to remember how we actually met. I don't know if it was, I mean, when do you remember?
I was at Montefiore at the time. It was like a long time ago. I mean, you were working on your book at the time.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow.
it's a while ago. So I think it was that. I think Emmy is the one who kind of introduced us.
Okay. All
I
right. So we have a
think
very
that's
close mutual friend, Emily, who served on Project Sleep's board, original board of directors when we first started. Yeah,
awesome.
for many years. And so I think, yeah, it was probably through Emily that we got connected. And I just feel so lucky because little did I know. I think, what Dr. Harris really brings that is so unique is this perspective of understanding human behavior, and understanding sleep uh, and sleep disorders and how to treat them. So I just think there's so many things that we could talk about today. And so I think to get started though, this question that always kind of something I'm always trying to think about is how do we get people that don't yet know that they could have a sleep condition? How do we get them to know that? Because I know so many of this people that are probably tuning in went years,
Yeah.
like myself, where I thought I had a problem of my willpower, or I wasn't like meant for law school because I just couldn't seem to stay awake during the reading. And it seemed like it was just part of the problem with me before I realized it was a sleep issue for so many years. And so, you know, how do you know whether it's kind of like a small problem or like occasional bad night's sleep versus like maybe something bigger?
Okay. So I think that's a complicated question in that I think the first thing is that we need to at least more and more physicians and doctors in general need to be trained in sleep medicine or just recognizing sleep disorders. When you think about it, primary care, they're taxed. They have so much that they're asking in just a general appointment that sleep usually is at the bottom, and it's often if someone has like their own complaint about sleep they bring it up, and sometimes it doesn't get brought up because they're now with billing and everything it's just super fast with insurance, so it's not the first thing people bring up. So we need to get doctors asking about it a little bit or a lot more and recognizing when things might be recognizing just different disorders are. Like you said with narcolepsy, 15 years for average diagnosis for a long time. It's getting better because people are learning more about it, but we need to be better still. Now, with insomnia, for example, and any kind of sleep disorder, actually, it should be, first of all, your spidey sense. So if you feel that something is off, like you were saying, like,
Your what? Your what
your
sense?
spidey sense, like
Your
Spider-Man,
sense?
spidey sense.
Your spidey sense? Like a
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
never heard this term. I love new terms. So
I have an 11-year-old boy. It's like everything's like Spider-Man and superheroes. So it's like if you kind of sense something's off, yeah, something is possibly off. Like your baseline. And if you feel like this is a continuous issue that keeps going for a number of weeks, a number of months, and it's not getting better no matter what you do, usually the first thing we always try is basic sleep hygiene, right? So make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure you're not having a lot of alcohol, like all that basic stuff. If that's not getting better and it's starting to impair your functioning, or it's happening multiple days a week, right? So consistency, so 3 or more days a week, you're having some sort of issue with excessive sleepiness, or you're not sleeping enough, and that's going on for a number of weeks, say a month or more, that's when you want to talk to a doctor. So a lot of people that I see will say, well, I have a bad night here and there. I have a bad night here and there. That doesn't mean you have chronic insomnia. But if you have insomnia or hypersomnia, whatever the issue is, but it's happening in multiple days a week for a few weeks, if not months or more, talk to your doctor. And if your doctor brushes it to the side, that's when that spidey sense that I was talking about is like, there's something off. This is not my baseline. Maybe it's a sleep disorder. Maybe it's something else. Maybe there's some other deficiency going on. Maybe it's diabetes. Who knows? But talk to your doctor. And if you feel like you get brushed off, go talk to someone else. You really you know yourself best.
I forgot to ask you also how you got interested in sleep. I meant to start there. How did you get here? Where,
Okay, so it started at Brown. So Brown, yay, has an awesome sleep researcher there, which I didn't appreciate how amazing she was, Mary Carskadden. So I just sort of like audited her class. I didn't even actually take the class, audited it. And I really it was Sleep 101. It was like basic sleep. And I just thought it was really interesting. And then when I went to graduate school, or actually before I went to graduate school, I worked at the Brown Med School for a year and I did addiction work. So I worked at the med school going to rehabs for people who were in rehab for alcohol issues. And what we did was we treated their insomnia it was with a medication approach. It was using trazodone, but we treated their insomnia while they were in rehab. And then we looked at their sleep issues. And if their sleep issues were well maintained, we found that people actually didn't have as much relapse with their addiction because they were sleeping better. So one of the big reasons that people will often relapse initially is because they're not sleeping. They start using substances again to go back to sleep. So if you treat the insomnia at first, they actually start sleeping better. And that's when it made this thing go off in my head saying, wow, such a small change, it's not that small, can make a change in someone's whole life. And that's when I started to really get interested in sleep even more, because I saw like what sleep could do for someone's whole life. And so going to graduate school, I did my dissertation in it. And then I went to Montefiore and I worked in the Sleep-Wake Disorder Center where Michael Thorpe and Meeta Goswami, who did a lot of narcolepsy work, they both trained me and really let me see the patient as a whole. And I had my own little carved out niche there. And I just fell in love with it. And I've stayed with it forever, because there's something about when someone's sleep gets better, you see how much more it improves their life. So I love it.
Yay, good. We hopefully more people will feel that way. I wish I'd taken the sleep class at Brown. Like, oh man, I could have saved myself a few years, because I would have learned about narcolepsy probably and cataplexy, and maybe I would have, but I was in the art history building, just all art history classes and avoiding all science. So.
I was a music major mostly. I was a psychology major a little bit, and then at the beginning, I finished that major, and then I actually played the upright bass, and I was like orchestra and everything. But I just took the sleep thing just on the side as for random. So I totally fell into it, and I'm so grateful that I've kind of fallen into it a few times. That then it led me to the Sleep-Wake Disorders Center at Montefiore, and then really solidified my love of it.
That's so cool. Okay, so. We need to have our spidey sense up, and hopefully, I think that is just really empowering. It's always empowering to hear a doctor say, if one doctor tells you, like kind of ignores you, to go to another, because somehow that still feels like you're doing the wrong thing. Yeah. And so thank you for saying that, because that's just really empowering. Any point of your journey, really. just like,
100%. And I try to educate my patients a lot that I work with when they're going to various physicians. Their physicians are great. But you have to advocate for yourself too. So if you feel like something's off, some of my patients are afraid to speak up sometimes. So I work with them on, okay, what are the issues that you're noticing are happening? Let's make sure that you're at least communicating it, that you're not afraid to communicate. It might actually be received fine. But if it's not received well or it's brushed off, then let's talk about what the next step is for you to do.
mm-hmm. So you've done a lot of media and education work, more than most sleep doctors, and I really, really value that because you're actually talking to the public, you know? So how did you get into doing that? And what do you feel like, I just find it fascinating because I think even just working with the media and narcolepsy, I often have to be educating them about what narcolepsy really is. You can't just assume that they know, even if they do a little bit of research. So I'm just interested about why you got into that area, and then what's your experience been like?
It totally fell in my lap. So when I got to Montefiore, Dr. Thorpe had done, he's very well known in the field. And he had started, I'm trying to remember, he was doing like the Donahue show, if anybody remembers Donahue. He was like doing Donahue and all these things, because he'd been at the sleep center since the 80s, early 80s. So he was doing all that stuff, the media stuff. And when I came on, he saw that I was passionate, that I like to talk. And he was like, you know what? We had a PR department at Montefiore, and they sent us sleep requests all the time from the media. And he was at some point, he was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this that much anymore. And he sent them to me. And it's interesting. I don't know. I just had a proclivity towards it. And then the more I started doing them, I didn't need the requests from Montefiore. It's just, things live on the internet. So then a reporter might just search for sleep doctor or whatever. And then it just spiraled from there. I personally love it 95% of the time because I can clarify things. A lot of the things I get are more like pop kind of psychology, sort of like, if you sleep in this position, what does it mean about your personality? Like that sort of stuff. And I can just kind of be like, I don't really do any of that. And there's no data behind it. So I can push that stuff to the side and I can kind of pick and choose. But I do it mostly because I want to educate people. So I'm very passionate about insomnia, narcolepsy. What are the different treatments? I want people to learn that not everything is necessarily a medication, or that medication is the right approach. And the other thing I'm really big on is like trying to get people to just recognize if they have apnea, because that's huge. And so many people just have no clue about it. So if people can at least have some awareness to maybe bring it up to their doctor, it's a win in my book for doing all that media.
How did you ultimately decide? Shelby recently published a book. I guess it was last year that it came out.
2019. It feels like I have lost track of end of 2019. I've lost track of time.
The Women's Guide to Overcoming Insomnia. And I was just curious, taking on a book is a big deal, having done one myself. And so when you looked into the future and said, I want to do this, how did you decide to take the approach of a women's guide and also insomnia?
So the publishing house had approached me and said, we're interested in having you write a book about whatever you want. And I said, you know what, I want to do something that talks to the public more so than maybe an academic sort of book. So that's where I narrowed it down first. And I said, insomnia is something I do day in and day out with that sort of treatment. And then they said, but you need to try to have some niche. And then I thought about what is the majority of patients that I see? And I was like, women. And it's interesting, when I was writing the book over 2017, 2016, there was a little bit of research for women in insomnia, but it hadn't really exploded. Over the past year, now everything's like women in insomnia, women in insomnia. It really wasn't as big of a thing 5 years ago, 6 years ago when I started working on it. So I had some research and I was just like, I have so many women that either muscle through, they end up coming to me because this has been going on for 10 years and they powered through because they had no time to put themselves first, or they figured, this is normal. I shouldn't be sleeping anyways. Hormones are a problem, all these other issues. Or they put everyone else first, like or not even just putting the others first, they just at night would do everything else and not prioritize their sleep. And so I just felt like it was a niche area that I could speak to, also having a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old myself. So I know, and being in my 40s, I know with the hormones and all that sort of stuff. So it really just spoke to me. And it's spoken to a lot of people. I'm really glad that it's been so well received.
So I think that like one of the interesting things that I became educated about through your book is kind of
Yeah.
connection between anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So the way we think about insomnia in the field is the most traditional way. That's a newer way of thinking about it, is that there can be something that sets off anxiety, something that sets off depression, an event, the pandemic, who knows, whatever. It could be a medical diagnosis. It could be a good stress sometimes, but oftentimes there's things like depression, anxiety that are starting to happen. And then when you start to feel depressed or anxious, you might start to have some sleep problems on top of that. And what happens is when you start having some sleep problems because you're feeling down, a lot of people will, for who are anxious, they find that they can't turn their brains off at night, or they wake up really early and their brains are going like this. Or people who are depressed sometimes will just lay in bed ruminating a lot, or just nap a lot during the day and have trouble sleeping at night. At the beginning, yes, the depression, anxiety might actually really be fueling the insomnia. But what happens is after a few months, all the behaviors that you start doing, like sleeping in or going to bed too early, or for people with insomnia, napping, which is totally different from, say, narcolepsy, caffeine use, sleep aids, all that sort of stuff, that's actually stuff that's maintaining the insomnia for a lot of people. So what we try to do, what I try to do, and what my book focuses on, is treating the things that people are doing. I always say it's an issue with common sense. So it's all the things that you're doing that are common sense to try and catch up on sleep, worrying about it, going to bed early, sleeping in, whatever. That's the stuff that's actually getting you in trouble, more than maybe the initial depression or anxiety that started it. So we try to treat them almost as two separate issues. So depression, anxiety with one treatment, insomnia, very focused behavioral, some cognitive treatment on the side. And that actually works very well. The problem is a lot of people have this assumption, and people still in like psychiatry still have this assumption that, well, just treat the depression, treat the anxiety and their insomnia or sleep issue. We see this with nightmares too. We see this across the board a lot. There are other sleep issues will get better. But the reality is the sleep issues don't usually get better for many people. There's sort of this residual thing because they didn't get targeted separately. So really, if you find you're in treatment for depression, treatment for anxiety, that's wonderful. Keep doing that. But if your insomnia is not getting better, really think about seeing someone for a targeted treatment to help it in that respect.
It's so interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I just feel like, I don't know, it's just, obviously it's not my personal experience, but I know other people that do have insomnia. Now, what do you think? I mean, so many people you talk about, I mean, obviously you're a behavioral specialist, and I know that's one of the areas where, studies have shown consistently that the cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is more effective long-term, or as effective or more long-term
As
than.
effective initially than most sleep aids, or many sleep aids, but it shines long term. That's really, yeah.
How do you manage in a world where, knowing that so many people are going down sort of the medication path, maybe, I don't know if it's true at a primary care uh,
Yeah.
possible level, so that primary care doctor feels empowered to treat it with a sleep aid, but then I guess that's maybe for some people short term, but then so many people end up taking those long term.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's again, it's complicated, but a lot of it is, first of all, CBT for insomnia, the behavioral cognitive behavioral treatment. It's the first line treatment by both the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and the Primary Care Society. So it really should be the first line treatment. But there's a few issues. One, there's not a lot of people who are true specialists in the field. There's some people who like say they do it here and there, but there's not a lot of people who are really specialists in CBT for insomnia. So a lot of primary care doctors have no idea where to refer to. There are apps, there's books, there's stuff that are good to start with, but it's also education of the docs. So some docs just don't know about CBTI. Some docs know, but patients who aren't sleeping are so, especially if it's a new onset sort of thing, they're so distraught by it a lot of times that I don't blame the doc. They want to help their patient feel better, right? So there's some of that pressure there too. And instead of saying, and it's hard nowadays, right, to say refer to me, and there might be a long wait list some weeks, it depends. So it really varies. A lot of what I do is trying to educate docs too, to like, let's do this first. Here are different ways. If you can't get in with someone, let's start with an app or a book or whatever, or you come see me. That's all I did at Montefiore a lot of times, was a lot of education of the physicians there. But it's also a lot of what I do is, like you were saying, people start it and they can't get off of it. So a lot of what I do is doing CBT for insomnia alongside whoever's prescribing the medication. And we very slowly work to get someone off, readjusting their program every time they step down. Sometimes people are surprised. They thought it was going to be harder than it was. It actually was. Sometimes it's harder than it actually they thought it was going to be. So it varies, but that's a lot of what I do is getting people off of sleep aids slowly over time.
We do have a very specific question, which is where are you located?
I'm in Westchester, New York. So I'm licensed in New York. So I do all telehealth right now. So I see all people from all over New York, sometimes Connecticut, New Jersey, they'll come over to me. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And if anybody has questions on where to find someone who's a provider, the Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine has a really good listing, and you can also go to my website and email me, and I'm happy to like direct you to the right place too through my website.
Great. We'll make sure to put that link. I put a link to your website in the video. If you guys look at the description, it's there, and the link to her book directly. But I'll add the Society for Behavioral Medicine as well, so people have. Okay, so let's see. As far as for people that might have other sleep conditions, I think that's what's always drawn me to be in contact with you is that often I think for something like narcolepsy, people are very medication focused, and medications are super important, but that there could possibly be other things that we could be doing. And I'm still learning about some of those best practices from other communities and seeing what could work for narcolepsy possibly. And of course, for me, I think social support is so important, that people have know other people with narcolepsy so they don't feel alone. And so there's social support, but probably some cognitive behavioral stuff too. So what's your take on a multidisciplinary approach to something like narcolepsy?
I mean, that's where I basically was born into sleep medicine, right? So that is the model with which I was taught. So Montefiore had the Narcolepsy Center, the Narcolepsy Institute, that dated back to I think the early to mid 80s with Meeta Goswami. And she saw a lot of narcolepsy patients, ran groups, a lot of our patients from the New York area, a lot of patients from the Bronx. But she saw patients they had a monthly group that went on for years. And they did that with Dr. Thorpe. And it was the perfect model to show that not everything is medication based. And then when I came in, I started to provide more of the CBT kind of approach too. So we had the psychosocial. Meeta did so much stuff for just employment issues that people were having. She was a wealth of knowledge. I did a lot of
support group.
It was a support group.
Yeah,
it was a support group. And then I did a lot of work with patients who might have had just depression, anxiety, negative thoughts about narcolepsy that might be impacting their life, and acceptance, and also sometimes not always acceptance, challenging some of the thoughts you're having, because not every thought we have is based in reality. So teaching people to look at their thoughts, is this a realistic thought? Is it something that I can change? And if I can change my thought or the way I approach my thoughts about this disorder or whatever it's impacting in my life, maybe that will help my mood in general. So I did a lot of that. And then I also did, it totally depended on the patient, but I would do napping strategies. I would do caffeine strategies, diet strategies, exercise, light exposure, all that sort of stuff too. So I came at it from that way. And Montefiore was amazing in that we just saw the patient as the whole patient. So that's there, in my opinion, there's no other way to really approach, especially narcolepsy.
Right, but that's so not what people mostly get. I mean, it just is heartbreaking to constantly hear stories. And I know I just see Madison here joined us, who is our superstar sleep-in advocate, who was in the newspaper a few days ago, sharing her story and about her sleep-in. And she said something to the effect of that no one really even told her what narcolepsy was. Mm-hmm. And, you probably just, for most people, they get a prescription and they leave an office and go on their way. And it just is heartbreaking that multidisciplinary approach isn't really what most people are getting. No. So what kind of, I'm especially interested about what you said about napping. I think it's really always like it's still a big challenge for me. So maybe I'm asking a personal question, but hopefully will resonate with other people. You know, I feel like it's really tough to know. I don't I don't schedule my naps. Maybe I should. That's probably and because I don't, I kind of let the day happen. And then if I happen to be in a place where I'm still home and it makes sense and to take one, then it's
Yeah.
great. But then
Yeah.
I'm often on my way to tennis and I get sleepy, you know, and then it's like, do I pull over and then have to delay by 15 minutes with my best friend who's going to be there and we only have an hour to play? And
I know.
so I just kind of push through. So I guess what are your thoughts about napping strategies?
I think, it, like I said, it really depends on the patient. It's so, I am a fan of them when they're useful. Some people don't find them particularly helpful, or they find it more, I don't know, like a frustration in their life to be able to do, not even that they just can't find time to do it, that it causes more frustration than anything. But if it does help you, then you have to arrange your life in a way, it's not ideal, to try and figure out how you can do it, but also know that it's not possible to do it every single day, probably, like you were saying, right? But then it also really depends on the person. Some people really do so well with like the 90 minute to 2 hour long nap. Is that necessarily always possible? Some people need just a 30-minute nap. It really, it really varies. But the thing that I do try to encourage is I am a big fan of, we were talking before we got online about the circadian rhythm and the body clock. So if you go to bed at the same time, you wake up at the same time, and you take the nap, you can kind of see how much more bang for the buck you'll have overall if you're consistent with certain things. And the napping is one thing that really can help if you do it at more of a consistent time. But then you can play around with the amounts of time and know if you can't do it, then it is what it is. It's not ideal, but that's part of it.
All right, let's talk about let's talk about circadian rhythms and stuff because I had a big moment reading your book where you were talking about body clocks and the environment and let's see about how our body clocks thrive on consistency. I've heard about circadian rhythms, I've heard about body clocks, but reading your book for the first time, I realized we are connected to our environment, all of us, in a way I hadn't really realized. I think I thought Julie Flygare decides what Julie Flygare does. And I'm an individual, and of course, narcolepsy has been humbling and realized that I need my sleep.
Yeah.
But as far as the timing and making sure I'm getting sunlight during the day and then not having light at night, I'm always kind of like, whatever to all that stuff because I'm like, I got enough problems. I'm going to deal with them the best I can. But tell us a little bit about our body clocks and why that's important.
So, like you were saying, Julie Flogger can do whatever she wants, right? We all think we're special. Guess what? We're not. We're all humans. We're all
We have
animal.
the whitey sense, so we're kind of special.
Well, a little bit, right? But we're all humans. We all have these body clocks that are set. I mean, the reality is it before electronics came around, before alarm clocks, before this kind of concept of a weekend versus weekday, insomnia rates and just sleep disorder rates, I mean, different sleep disorders, but insomnia in general was not anywhere near like it is now. And I think for in general, to get your body on a good rhythm when it comes to falling asleep and waking up in the morning, it's very hard. That's why with like daylight saving coming up, it's like the worst thing for so many people because you're throwing off your body clock, right? We need consistency. That's how the cells in your body thrive. They know the clock, they know when to do certain things, they all have different functions. Your brain in the pineal gland, it releases melatonin to help you sleep. And it does it at around the same time, a few hours before you go to bed. If you have varying bedtimes, varying wake times, your body doesn't release the chemicals that it needs to release to be able to sleep on a consistent basis. Now, granted, it's different for, say, narcolepsy and say, apnea, but there's still this idea that we should be sleeping when it's ideally dark out, but that's not always possible for people who work shift work, whatever. But it really is the thing that keeps people's, especially if it's not insomnia, that's what keeps insomnia at bay for many people, is consistency. And we think that we can outsmart it and just turn on the weekend clock, and the reality is that's not going to help. So.
And probably it sounds like even eating, like the eating time should be consistent and probably not
Really?
the bedtime. Okay, So this is, I think, right up your alley. I I love reading about different parts of psychology or whatever. So I read a book about willpower.
Okay.
They were talking about how willpower is a thing that you only have so much every day. I don't, I can't remember, but you
Okay.
have a certain amount, and it's basically kind of like energy, and like when you use it up, it's like kind of gone. So your willpower gets less and less throughout the day as the day goes on.
Uh-huh.
I forget which chemical, but anyway, so I thought about that, and that makes me realize like maybe that makes going to bed at the right time and shutting down from my phone and not eating a bowl of ice cream. I know I also have narcolepsy and I'm a pretty sleepy person and probably make some bad decisions around sugar at night. Um, but in general, I just thought like if our willpower goes down throughout the day, like how can we prepare to like set ourselves up to make better decisions at night when our willpower is the lowest?
That's a great question. And I think it makes so much sense, right? You have like just fewer defenses against all the things that you want to do at night, right? I'm a fan just from a behavioral standpoint, and I've done this with myself. I'm a fan of picking one thing to change at a time. Instead of saying tonight's going to be the night that I'm going to go to bed, I'm not going to do all these things, I'm going to do all, it's too much. But it might be a little bit easier to be kind to yourself, do what you normally do, but say, you know what, tonight I'm going to aim for one Netflix show as opposed to three. And I'm going to stop it at that point and then get in bed at a certain time. Or just aim for one and just, or for some people, it's just turn off the autoplay where it goes from show to show. That one step alone is really hard for some people to do because then they have to make a decision if they're going to watch another one. So it's sometimes just something small like that, right? Because the idea of like, I'm going to avoid all sugar at night is a hard one. But maybe I'm going to try to go to bed at this time tonight. Or I'm going to cut off electronics as opposed to an hour before if that's hard for someone. Start with just 10 minutes before, because that, even if you don't have a lot of willpower at that point, it might be a little bit easier. And once you get that under your belt for a few days or a week or so, it's not an issue anymore. It's automatic.
Mhm.
Then you add on something else, and then you
Okay.
add on something else. It's
That
just
sounds reasonable. I feel like I could do that. I
good.
think I think for me, I need to work on consistency. I think that that's probably like a big one as far as like, and still let myself do whatever I want, but just the timing.
Yeah.
And then maybe I could start working on, my ice cream and gummy candy problems and my game problems. I have it less, well, there's some Bachelor in Paradise problems right now. I'm big into Bachelor in Paradise, but more a game.
I get below debt. I mean, like, and I'm not immune to all this stuff too. I get sucked into all of it myself, right? So and I sometimes will notice, okay, I'm doom scrolling a little bit too much or whatever. It's like I have to back myself off, but sometimes it's hard to just cut myself off fully. So one thing at a time. Or if I'm eating way too much at night, I'll say, you know what, I'm just going to cut off maybe the ice cream for a little while, and then I'll work on the ice cream and the gummy. You just have to do it slowly. It's really how behavior change works the best.
Um, let's see. So we had a question about having my shifts totally change the day after daylight saving. Oh, yeah. So daylight savings, I've seen some tips come out from AASM that seemed, something about changing. So I'm glad we have the sleep in the weekend of daylight savings because hopefully everyone can go to bed a little bit early during the sleep in and that can help shift a little bit. Do you have any tips about changing over during daylight savings?
It's really about, I hate it so much. It's about going to bed a little earlier if you can, even starting tonight, right? Because it's going to change tomorrow. So go to bed a little earlier tonight, go to bed a little earlier tomorrow night. And then really it's about tomorrow, if you can, try to adjust the timing of when you're going to eat. So in a way, it's like, okay, so maybe tonight you go to bed about a half hour earlier than you normally would. So that tomorrow night you go to bed an hour earlier. But tomorrow, I often do this, I do with my kids sometimes, is we'll change the clocks a little bit earlier. So you're tricking yourself that it's a different time already and do something like that. And you adjust your eating, you adjust your exercise, whatever you're going to do, make sure you're getting light. And then the next day, it's super crucial to make sure you're hydrating. Sleep deprivation, because it's an hour less typically, causes a good amount of dehydration. So make sure you're drinking water. Avoid alcohol. Try to get some exercise, even if you don't feel like it. Try to go out for a walk. Bright light is really key. And consistency, timing, right? So now your body clock has shifted. We need to give it as many external cues to keep it in check. So eating at around the same time, now that you have the clock set different, eat at routine times, exercise at routine times, and really try to stay with that. And if you get light at the same time in the morning, open up the shades. That will hopefully help you adjust. It usually takes about 2 or 3 days for people. But yeah.
So water matters too? Oh my God.
Just drink water. I mean, it's not like that's not like the biggest tip, but I do find like when people travel, right? When you're, it's all jet lag, essentially it's jet lag that we're all experiencing. You know, when people travel, hydration is a big recommendation. So, because you just need it. You will feel better if you're hydrated. So just keep that in mind, but don't like go overboard. Just make sure you're drinking your like 64 ounces or so a day, but most people don't. So
Right. Well, this is my theory that we're more like plants than we think. You know, we need light, we need dark, we need water, we need food.
yep. From here up, we think we're smart. Neck up. The rest of it, we're still, we're biology. That's it.
What about for children? Do you treat children and do children, I think that's probably the area where I've seen actually there's been some more attention to other approaches besides medication. Like that somehow, I mean, maybe that's just from knowing the Boston group pretty well and at Children's that they take a very multidisciplinary approach. Um, but do you have any sort of different techniques you use for kids that are diagnosed with sleep disorders?
It depends upon what the sleep disorder is. So I am board certified. I've worked with babies through, I always say like 3 months through, my oldest patient was 92. So I've had the whole range. I do a good amount of sleep work with like babies, toddlers, preschoolers, and even like 9 and 10 year olds. I have a lot of 9 and 10 year olds right now, but it's more that it's more insomnia sort of stuff with them. I am not though a child psychologist. So a lot of times when it's sleep issues like that, like insomnia sort of stuff, like I have to have my mom next to me, it's a lot of parent training. So that's what I'm doing a lot more of. If there's an underlying significant anxiety or depression disorder, then I usually refer, or like a significant separation anxiety, then I refer out to a child psychologist. But a lot of times, a lot of it's parent training, right? Let's do some reward charts, right? With the really young kids, then I do some modified, just whatever we need to do based on the age to get them sleeping through the night and sleeping better. There are a bunch of different ways that we'll do it. With narcolepsy, I don't see that many kids, but I did when I was at Montefiore, where I was on the FDA approval studies for Xyrem. So I saw a good number of kids in the studies there where we were working with them, but it was really much more of a drug-focused kind of approach. We just didn't really see many kids with narcolepsy there. So
Yeah. Well, I think they probably have a lot of the same things, a lot of the social isolation and the challenges we've been talking about maybe they actually might have more scheduling. They have often a more regimented schedule because of school
yeah.
than I do as an adult, especially during a pandemic.
Yeah, and I see a lot of adolescents, like young adolescents to maybe even older adolescents who have circadian rhythm issues. So there's the consistency, right? So they are extreme night owls. So that's something I've seen for years, but it's gotten worse with the pandemic. Sometimes gotten better if they don't have school where they have to get too early anymore. But that's an area that we treat a lot. But yeah, we try. It's interesting with kids. From my perspective, we try to treat everything behaviorally first. Um, and then go to melatonin or whatever else the treatment might be. It's different with adults a lot of times. So
We'll start with medication. Interesting. Gosh, I just had a next question for you and it just totally slipped my mind.
although that being said, melatonin is used like candy a lot of times for kids, and it has a place for sure, but it shouldn't be the first line thing that we should always try. Just like with adults with insomnia, it's not always a quick fix.
Yeah. Okay, so can we talk about the pandemic a little bit and about sleep? I don't know if if you've experienced different things or what you're seeing. You know, I know for me, it took me about a year, I think, to realize just recently that I can sleep whenever I want. I'm always here. I'm in my apartment, but I can't tell you how strong that sense of, I mean, I guess it's natural. I want to get stuff done.
Yeah.
I have a lot to do and I make commitments to people and I want to fulfill them and I want to email people back and do everything. And so that is always the pressure that maybe didn't even come from society to begin with. It just came from myself. I don't know. And so it took me about a year to realize though, like why don't I just go and take more naps? Like, why am I sitting here trying to push through? I took notes for my presentation earlier today. I'd taken notes for it when I was half asleep. The notes were a total mess. Like, why didn't I just,
Right.
so it's
What do
kind of,
you have to gain from it?
Yeah, not a lot. So I was just interested, what you think about the pandemic, what's happened to people's sleep, and yeah.
All right. So the pandemic, some of my patients that I was seeing for insomnia, some older patients, um, their sleep got better in an interesting way. Or some patients who had to get up super early to go to work every day in Manhattan, right? Their sleep actually started to get better because they didn't have that pressure that I have to sleep tonight or else, I'm getting up at 4 in the morning and these things. Yeah. So it's interesting. It alleviated it for some patients, especially like the teenagers who didn't have to go to school wake up at 6 in the morning. But then there's this whole other group of people that are having more of this new onset insomnia or any sort of and apnea. I'm seeing a lot more of patients with just because we're much more sedentary. We're eating a lot more, and guess what? We're snoring a lot more. So, but with insomnia, it's this idea, in my opinion, the way I've kind of conceptualized it, is that all control was taken away from us back in March. Like the only thing we could control was what was in our house, essentially, right? And even then, you couldn't like wiping down everything that came in for a lot of people. You can't control anything. So the one basic thing that some people could always rely on that they could control was their sleep, right? I know that I can always count on my sleep. And when you start getting anxious about the pandemic and you're not moving, you're not getting the same light exposure, your eating is off, all those typical rhythms that we're used to, and stressors, financial stressors, all that sort of stuff. Like I was talking about, there might be something that kick off an insomnia. That's what happened. It kicked it off. And for a lot of people that I've worked with, the way they've described is that I couldn't even control my sleep. And the more I couldn't control it, the more I tried to force it to happen. And then it just led to this like more heightened anxiety about sleep overall, if that makes sense. And it's a different feeling to a lot of the insomnia that's going on there. So it's a lot more sleep problems, and it has a different flavor to it in a weird way to say it.
And I didn't ask you this in advance or anything, but do you have any sense of any thoughts about, the fatigue of COVID, people that have had COVID and any sort of sleep issues there? Have you seen any of that yet?
I've seen two patients that had COVID and have had the fatigue, but I haven't seen that much of it yet come out. I've had some people say they're insomnia, and I've had some of the excessive sleepiness too. People asking, but I haven't actually seen them as patients, but I know it's out there. I think, give it a few more months, we'll start seeing more and more data come out on it. It's definitely impacting sleep somehow, one way or another. I don't know, but it's definitely doing something.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Oh man. Let's see.
And the more we talk about it, the better. The more we
Yeah,
get people aware of it, right? Not to just say, it's long COVID. I can't do anything about it.
right,
Maybe there is nothing you can do, but maybe there is something we can do.
right.
Don't suffer in silence if your sleep is off. Spidey sense.
I think that is a great quote. Don't suffer in silence when your sleep is off.
There you go.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of what else we should talk about. I don't see any other questions. Are there any other areas that we haven't talked about?
I mean, I can talk about all areas of sleep.
Any questions, guys? Oh, do you have any wind down tips for night owls in recovery?
Oh, so night owl is how extreme of a night owl. So if you find that no matter what you do, you can't go to sleep earlier and you want to go to sleep earlier, there are treatments for like that circadian rhythm issue, right? So it's like I can't go to bed until 4 in the morning, but everyone's in bed at 10. Then there are things you can do with someone, if you like someone like myself, to try and get you going to bed earlier. If because it sounds like you're trying to force yourself to wind down a little bit and you can't find anything to make yourself sleepy. That's what it sounds like. I mean, wind down really varies. Like, it doesn't matter about the time. Whatever time you go to bed, we always try to encourage half hour to an hour of wind down. So that means dim lights, let the melatonin come out naturally in your brain to help make you sleepy. That's the whole point of it. But it varies on everyone. Like, some people really like to read. Some people want to do, I have a lot of patients who are doing puzzles right now, like jigsaw puzzles, sort of things. Knitting is popular, meditation apps, but you just want to be careful because if you have the phone, then you're staring at a blue light. So just take it, put it to the side. Audiobooks are really good. And I have like all these younger patients that are watching The Office left and right. The Office and Friends, super popular. And they all want to watch it, but I'm trying to get them away from the screens. So if they have to and they want to like steps at a time, right, to move away and change your behaviors, then get blue block. They're not the ideal, but you can get like blue blocking glasses or get like a filter for your computer that will help block some of the blue light. So you have to find something that works for you, because if you resent it, you're still not going to go to sleep. But then if nothing's working and you have a very late night owl kind of issue, then you might want to see someone, because we can do things to try and get your circadian clock moved a little bit earlier.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about like circadian issues. I think I think it should be like a big topic moving forward. I have a feeling that there's might be a lot more people that are living with circadian conditions, because there's not, even sleep disorders like narcolepsy are underdiagnosed, but I imagine that people with circadian issues are really
Oh,
underdiagnosed.
yeah, I mean it's that's an interesting one too, in that there's a bunch of different, so circadian issues are basically, the idea is that your body clock is off. That's the idea behind it. So there's the two most common ones are the night owls, delayed sleep phase. So that's when you go to bed late and you wake up late, but you get a full amount of sleep and you sleep throughout the night. It's just shifted. The other set is you go to bed really early and you wake up really early. And that's, if anybody here has or is of themselves, it's a lot of times we see in older adults. So if you have an older adult who complains, I wake up at 3 in the morning every night and I can't go back to sleep, all you do is ask them, well, what time do you go to bed? If they're going to bed at 7 p.m., that's a phase issue. It's not insomnia. They're getting a full night's sleep. A lot of those patients get put on Ambien and stuff in the middle of the night. They shouldn't be, because it's a different problem. So the delayed one we see a lot in adolescence. And that's when we really see it. And it's interesting because of the late school start times, or the online school for a lot of people hasn't been as much of an issue. But before the pandemic, I'm just giving talks to schools all the time about the problem with too early of a school start time, because you're waking up, you're sleepy, right? And your brain is just not functioning in the way it should be when you're sleepy. And we're testing kids, we're testing people at a time when they're still half asleep, essentially. So that's a big area that I think, hopefully, if schools go back to an early time, that hopefully my field will be able to get them to really rethink it. And then the other thing is, like, sometimes with circadian, like jet lag or the delayed people, sometimes they just pick a career that actually fits what their issue is. And then it's not a disorder anymore. Some people just choose freelance work, or they choose to work as an actor or something like that, where they can, or a writer, where they can work late and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't cause a disruption in their life. A sleep issue is an issue when it causes a disruption in your life.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's interesting when you don't know though. Like I have a feeling, I have a good friend that I think it's circadian. It's like a delayed circadian. But the social dynamics of that, if you don't have a diagnosis, are
Yeah.
really different. And how, especially if you have kids and, you can be up and you could, take care of the kids in the middle of the night, but then, 9 or 10 in the morning and you're not doing great. And so it would just be interesting, even the conversations could possibly change in that household if you knew what you were dealing with. Uh,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like you have to think, like, it really is only diagnosable, that sort of stuff, as a disorder if it's causing an issue.
Mhm.
So maybe they've arranged the whole life around it. It's not an issue.
But that's
Who
so
knows?
strange though, because if you have, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you've arranged your life around it, yeah,
Then that would be an issue, right? You would
yeah,
think. But the other thing with circadian treatments is, just like most sleep treatments, right? It's never just a pill, right? Melatonin in certain doses and lower amounts is actually very helpful for some of those patients, and we time it properly. But you have light boxes, timing you're going to bed, changing things. It's time intensive for, unless you're just doing melatonin, it's a time intensive sort of treatment. So you have to be committed to it. So a lot of patients will come to me and say, well, I just want to sleep on a more normal schedule. It's like, but why? What's your reason? What's your why? And they have to have a real reason for it. Otherwise, the treatment's not going to follow through.
yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious about your thoughts about, there's a lot of people always think of technology as, solutions
Yeah.
in sleep, and I have a kind of an issue with that, possibly because I believe, and I've seen this happen to friends, that they think that their sleep is off, and so they're going to get a Fitbit, and it's going to kind of like they're going to be track their sleep, and then therefore solve their sleep.
Yep.
I think that's problematic in how these things are marketed in a little bit more of a solution way. I think tracking cool, I guess. But what are you tracking? And I have heard some thoughts about even that these can cause extra anxiety about sleep though. So I was
Yeah,
curious.
you hit the nail on the head, right? So, I mean, I have one too, right? And I've tested them. The idea is that I always look at the trackers as being really good for people who can sleep, but they don't make sleep a priority. So you're someone who's working 90 hours a week, you're falling asleep, getting into bed at 3 in the morning, you're getting up at 6, and you're just chronically sleep deprived, but that's based on your own choice or lifestyle. So I think they're really good for helping make someone more aware of just how little sleep and what time they're getting in bed and what time because they're really just movement trackers. That's essentially, I mean, they have some other fancy stuff that they do, but some will track heart rate stuff, but that's when I think they're valuable to give someone that light bulb moment. There's like two areas of sleep medicine, right? There's the area of treating sleep disorders. And then do a lot of wellness stuff too. So I'm a big fan of like, if people are good sleep, like if they don't have an actual sleep disorder, but they don't make sleep a priority and they can't actually get sleep, they need to start making it a priority because it's going to help the rest of their life. That's when these are good. The watches there's research that's been coming out that essentially shows that this is not so accurate for, they'll say, you got this much deep sleep, this much light sleep. Like, no, you need to have a sleep study for that sort of stuff, right? So they're not so exact in that aspect. And I think what happens if you have some sleep issues already, all it's going to do is make you hyper focused on it. I have patients do a sleep diary for me every week when they come to see me. There's a version of it on my website, there's a version in my book. I much rather care about what someone subjectively thinks about their sleep than what the watch says. And I have patients that will come in with just printouts of like Fitbit data. I'm like, no, I want to treat your perception. If you feel like you woke up 10 times for an hour, that's a problem. But if you start reporting that you're only up once for a short amount of time, then I know you feel like you're getting better. That's all we care about. I don't care about what the watch says. So really, if you have a sleep disorder, trash the watch. Don't trash it, but just don't wear it at night. It will make it worse for you. Yeah, I mean, I do use it sometimes for the circadian rhythm though, people, like just to kind of see what time they fall asleep and then wake up, but I'm not looking at the middle of the night stuff. I don't find it helpful.
Thank you for addressing that, because I think that there's just we always want to find hope in different places, and I think that there's something sexy about technology solving our sleep, and so thank you for explaining, because that could be useful for some people. And
Right. But even that being said, like I'm a fan of, like I'm doing something with my best friend on like sleep and your bedroom. Like I'm a fan. I will do stuff I want you to enjoy your room. Like you've done a lot. Like you want to make it a place that you enjoy. You want to have all that sleep hygiene around you. But if something is marketed as this will fix your chronic sleep problem, question it initially, right? But things that you want to have like a basis good, like good bed, good sheets, like all that stuff. This though is not going to necessarily get you there.
and so then, just because when we started our conversation, we were talking about blankets.
Yes.
I do think that weighted blankets are pretty cool. And so what are your thoughts about those? I don't think they're really talked about very much. I think there's more talk about the technology than weighted blankets. So what are those?
That's another, like whatever makes you comfortable is great. You want to be comfortable for sleep, but don't expect it to solve all the problems, right? Weighted blankets, I'm sitting with one now. So weighted blankets are great in that there's been research on them for kids with autism and some ADHD because it's this kind of like pressure feeling that kids sleep better with them typically. And you have to weight it properly, usually about 10% of your body weight. Problem is there's really not that much. There's a little bit on like adults with anxiety, but there's really nothing for sleep. It's fascinating. I bet you in the next few years there'll be a lot of stuff coming out. But there's really not much. That being said, anecdotally, I have so many patients that sleep with them who have a good amount of anxiety. It's more the patients with a lot of anxiety, I find, that really like them. It just gives them that sense of touch, pressure, and just calm. That's great. Few caveats though. If you get hot at night, they're not always great, so you want to find a cooling one. And then the other caveat is if you get used to sleeping with a weighted blanket, good luck trying to sleep without it. So you're going to have to carry a weighted blanket with you to places where you travel to. So that's the one thing you have to keep in mind, right? So
I love those caveats though. I think those are really important. So
Yeah, like if anything you train yourself to sleep with, like a sound machine, right? That's like you need to have a sound machine for a long time. It's something that's got to be broken. It's not an easy habit to get rid of. They're not bad, but it's just something you have to think about for the future when it comes to sleeping.
mhm. What about sleep and age? We had a question about sleep and menopause, and tell us about sleep and aging.
So sleep and aging. So don't expect as you get older to sleep like you did necessarily when you were 17. As you get older, so there's like two different things going on. So as you get older, what typically happens is you don't need drastically less sleep. So that's a big misnomer that we hear a lot. This is normal sleep in general. So you don't drastically need a lot less. What tends to happen is when you get a lot older, to like later middle age, older adult aspect, start taking a nap usually. And so the sleep at night is a little less because you're napping during the day more. And the sleep at night becomes less deep. So you don't have that same like restorative, deep sleep. And that's something that I try to educate patients on a lot because a lot of times people just want to be knocked out throughout the night and they resort to like Ambien and other medications, but that's not necessarily going to give you normal sleep either, right? What should normal look like? But if you're waking up a lot to pee, like some of that's normal, but then there's a fine line as to how much of it's excessive. That's when you want to talk to your doctor, how long you're up for at night. Menopause, hormone changes in women affects it. It perimenopause, which is usually starts usually in like early to mid 40s for many women. It's a period of a number of years until you have a cessation of your period for at least a year. That's when you hit menopause. So that transition from perimenopause to menopause, lots of hormonal fluctuations, and that's when people start to have night sweats. They'll wake up with a hot flash in the middle of the night. They find that a lot of women I work with will wake up in the morning or early morning because their mind is racing. That's stuff that really can impact sleep. But there are medications, there are supplements that you can try. My book talks about all of them. And CBT for insomnia has some data behind it. I work with women all the time who are going through menopause to try and modify some of their behavioral and cognitive changes or lifestyle or make some behavioral and cognitive changes for them to help them sleep better. So there are definitely things you can do. And that's one of the other reasons I didn't mention why I thought to write the book is that so many women are like just suffering. And sometimes it's really hard. Menopause is really hard, but there are treatments that can help. It shouldn't be suffering in silence for years.
Mm. So important. And so
Yeah.
I'm like getting close to 40 and I'm just not ready. Okay.
You would, it's gonna come. So,
Yeah.
but you know, the other thing with hormone changes too is that think about sleepiness, right? So there are issues that can happen before even a woman like every month before she has like menstruates or whatever. That week before typically either causes insomnia for some people or it causes excessive sleepiness. So if you notice that there's something going on that's off with your sleep that week before, I'm always a fan of tracking it. That's where you might want to talk to your doctor too, because there are treatments that you can do to help with it.
Wow. And what do you think about age and sleep disorders? I've heard a lot of different things. I've heard it really can vary, similar to pregnancy and narcolepsy. Like some people feel less sleepy, some people feel more sleepy. Their symptoms get worse. So, what do you think about narcolepsy and aging?
Narcolepsy aging, I just haven't seen as personally haven't seen as many older adults. So I can't speak to it so much from what I've seen. I have seen a number of patients. It's mixed, right? I've seen some patients report that it's gotten a little bit better over time, but I haven't seen someone for long amounts of time to see them really later in life. But yeah, I mean, I think from what I've seen, it does tend to dissipate a little bit, the severity of it.
Yeah, I've also heard that maybe people, when they're retired, kind of find their kind of like what you were saying about finding a job that works for your sleep schedule.
Exactly.
Um, that
But
sometimes,
that's interesting, right? So you kind of you can work around it a little bit more. But then that being said, not narcolepsy. There's a lot of people that when they retire, they develop insomnia. So your sleep cycle, right? Your body clock, you now are like, you know what? I don't have to get up at the same time I got up at for 50 years. So I'm just going to do whatever. And if I have a bad night of sleep, I'll sleep in. I'll do all these other things. And that can worsen the sleep too. So I see more insomnia patients that come to me and they're like 50s, 60s, 70s because they had new onset insomnia.
wow. Do you think that there's any areas that really fascinate you or that you think are like going to be the hot topics in the future of sleep?
That's a great question. Um, I really think you were hitting the nail on the head a little bit. I think that the circadian rhythm stuff is going to get bigger and bigger over time. I think because it was just before the pandemic, it was starting to really pick up steam for the kids and school start times, and people are starting to talk about it more and more. And I really do think all these shifting schedules, because when people start going back to school in person, I think these things are going to really come to a head. And people have to now have gotten used to getting up at 8:30 to just kind of roll out of bed in their pajamas and go to work at their desk. I think it's going to start to really hit people that now I got to go back to work at 5 in the morning, and they might have real trouble adjusting their circadian rhythm. So I think that's a big area that's going to hopefully get addressed. And I also do think that insomnia and medication and CBTI is going to have a bigger role, because I think the pandemic medication use for a lot of people, understandably, has gone through the roof. So I think there's going to be a big role of like, how do we get people off of a lot of the medications that they've been on to try and manage themselves throughout the pandemic.
Yeah. And I don't know, you know, I obviously don't think having an app is possibly as good as seeing a clinician, but I do think that by those, like there's the new CBTI, I'm forgetting the name, the shut eye that got approved by the
Shut
FDA.
eye.
I forget the new name of it, but things like that, I think will increase the awareness of CBTI. Like all of that is so good, you know.
And I think for initial insomnia, or people who have insomnia that don't have a lot of complications or aren't on a lot of medications or any other significant medical or psychiatric issues, I think they have a great place. And I think that should be a first line try. If someone's starting to have new onset insomnia and they're going to the primary care doc, that should be something tried. But they're definitely not for everyone. That's
Right.
for sure.
Yeah. So Amelia, I think Amelia is in Japan, if I'm remembering correctly. I think, I'm hoping I'm getting that right, Amelia. And she has a question that actually goes to a question I was going to ask you. So I'll start with hers, which is, can you touch on your professional opinion of how insomnia or poor sleep quality affect memory, cognition, and mood?
It's not great. I'll leave it at that. You know, but here's the double-edged sword with it, right? So I do a lot of media stuff, right? And I'm big on just people who don't have a sleep problem, making sleep a priority. Make sure you get good sleep quality, your environment's great, you know, you do all this sort of stuff so you optimize your sleep, because that will help your memory. Now, when it comes to insomnia patients, I've been getting so many referrals lately because people are worried about this link between insomnia and Alzheimer's and sleep deprivation and Alzheimer's. The problem is it definitely affects it, right, long term. But the more you worry about it, guess what you're not going to do? You're not going to sleep, because I have to sleep tonight. Otherwise, XYZ is going to happen to me medically. So a lot of it is working with patients on trying to let go of worrying about the future, focusing on what they can do right now so that they'll start sleeping, and then the future won't be as much of a big issue, or you can't predict anything fully, but it'll be less of an issue, hopefully, if you start sleeping better. The more you worry about the consequences, the possible consequences, the worse it's going to be for your sleep.
And then what about poor sleep quality? So like, I mean, that's kind of what I was going to ask you about, is that I've been thinking a lot about analogies because we use this analogy. Project Sleep's been using it because I remember reading it in an article that Jerry Siegel wrote like a long time ago, 2000, I think. And he said that the sleepiness of narcolepsy was similar to being awake for 48 to 72 hours. That was like the call to sleepiness. And so we've been using that for a while. And then recently I was kind of like, I mean, I think what people get out of that is, wow, that just seems really extreme.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that people get it in a sense of like that they could actually know what that feels like, because I don't know how many people really stay up for 48 to 72 hours
Right.
and what that ends up. So I was kind of thinking about trying to think of other ways. And one thing that came to mind to me, and then people say something like, well, wake up in the middle of the night and try to do your taxes without any coffee or something. I mean, maybe something like that. People, if you have to get up for a flight early, I'm trying to think of my before narcolepsy. I remember getting up at like really early for a flight and not sleeping well night before, and you're just kind of off. But then I thought like, well, what about like taking a Tylenol PM, or like a Alka-Seltzer, or like a Benadryl like during the day, and how that affects your cognition? Because well, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, or just being really drunk, but it's not like you're really, what do you think about any sort of analogies around how sleepiness affects cognition?
I saw you post on that a while ago, and it struck a chord with me, because it is hard, right, to say it's like you've been up for 3 days. So what? But it's what are all the things that chronic sleep deprivation really do affect, right? It's memory, it's irritability, it's just just stress tolerance, all that sort of stuff. So I think that people need to connect with that aspect too. But it's like, how do you get at that, right? So sleep, maybe not even just like sleep quantity, right? So I think definitely like there's people who misuse Ambien, right, or any of the sleep aids, and then they end up doing things and they have no recollection. It's like automatic behaviors, right? They're doing things, they drive, they get in car accidents, all this sort of stuff, because part of their brain is literally shut off. So they took it too early in the morning when they got up, and they just really should have been sleeping, and they weren't. That's I think a good way to think about it, right? You're going through life in like a fog with like an automatically just doing things without connecting or really thinking about it. But then the other way to think about it is like newbornhood, right? Newborndom, like when you have that broken here and there, it's not extreme, but there's a bit of that, like stress tolerance is not there, you're not thinking clearly. Like sometimes for some people that can connect to them too, but it's a hard concept. I do agree with you, it's a hard concept for people to get, other than that, wow, 3 days awake. But the ambient thing, or any kind of medication where it turns off a part of your brain and then you just do automatic things without really realizing what you're doing and knowing what you're doing, that's I think pretty powerful for some people.
Yeah. Yeah, I just trying to think of like what else, what other times. So you say like, because it kind of, my video got a little bit, so you said like newborns, like a baby sort of?
Yeah, like, I mean, in that initial phase, sometimes they'll sleep in with junks, but like the ones who are like sleeping an hour here and there, and you're really not sleeping at all, that's a good way to kind of.
All right. So, yep. So we're kind of like toddlers. Okay. That's what's Elle. Hi, Elle. Oh my gosh, you're awake in Australia. Maybe it's morning. It's Saturday. Uh, so, okay. All right. Well, if we, as a community, I want to keep thinking of analogies and ways for people to try to understand. But I think that's a really, that parts of your brain, I just can't get through to that. Like I had an ex-boyfriend where I just say, I'm really, really tired. Like we're coming home from a movie. All I can do is just be a body. I can't like work. This isn't working, but still just trying to engage with me, trying to have conversation. And like, I'm just not going to be a nice person. I'm just not there.
Yeah.
At least I could say that, which is the best I could do. Like,
But like, yeah, like if you have a newborn, I mean, some people are more power to them. They're like fully in it and they're great. That was not me, right? I was too super sleep deprived, recovering from having a baby. It's more of like just doing everything. Like, okay, I've got to change a diaper. I've got to feed. I've got to do it. But there's no other, you have no brain space for anything else. That's it. And then I got to go sleep, on and off.
right. And I think that, that was like one of the initial messages from your book, which also resonated with me in living with narcolepsy, was that you were saying that being awake and being asleep is not just like an on-off switch. It's a process. And I think Elisha here, if I'm hoping I'm saying your name right, she says, I walk through life in limbo between sleep and reality. And I think that, for narcolepsy, that's kind of the problem of the misconception too, is that, we're just falling asleep instantly. I'm asleep now. Like, oh, that sounds so nice. I'd love for that to happen to me. Instead, I'm walking through life like out of it, not knowing really what's happening, not remembering things, moody, so.
And even, I'll never forget, like Dr. Thorpe always used to say, like, even if you have energy because of medication or whatever that's helped, there's still always this background of sleepiness that's there. And that's the thing that I think is really hard for a lot of people to appreciate and understand. That maybe you can do things, but there's still whatever that background of sleepiness looks like for you is the challenge for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not going to cry because that's how I feel right now. But I think it's just important that we think of ways of communicating that and that's good for everyone to know, because everyone should know it's more of a transition.
Yeah.
I remember for my dad, he just said, oh, I loved falling asleep. I just lay down in the bed and the bed would just take me in and I'd just be asleep. I'm like, I don't know. I didn't have that experience, but
And also, like, just like, I don't have narcolepsy, but having had two kids, right? I'm one of those people that they're always like, sleep when the baby sleeps. And then I'm still so kind of keyed up from doing what I need to do. I can't fall back. And there's that frustration of you're so sleepy and you can't sleep. That's another thing I think that could be a connecting factor too.
mm-hmm.
What are you thinking?
So we're kind of like sleep deprived parents, or maybe also like toddlers. So, okay.
No,
All right.
I don't know fully about that, but it's like, it's hard because it's just it's a different I don't know, it's a different feeling in a way, but there's that feeling of I need to sleep so badly and I can't necessarily right now.
Mhm.
And that's the thing I think that people can sometimes relate to too.
Mhm. Well, we've gone over time, so I just want to thank you, Shelby, for being awesome and for all that you do and for spending time with us at the beginning of the sleep in.
Thank
Um,
you very much for
it's
having me.
um, I just wish there were more people like you. Can we clone you times 100 and send you to every major city? And
Oh, please.
um, yeah.
And seriously, your book, every patient that I work with, I recommend it to every single person because a lot of the people that I see and I recommend Project Sleep. I recommend a lot of the narcolepsy resources because everyone I see is usually newly diagnosed or has been and just didn't know of any of the resources and they feel like they're on like an island.
Mhm.
And just connecting and seeing like for some people your book has been this like wow, I'm not the only one sort of thing. So I'm so glad that you guys are doing the work that you're doing because it's helping so many people as you can see who are all online right now.
Yeah, well, it's fun. So, it is. I think that's just the thing that I hope that we can continue to change. So, um, but thank you for all you do and thank you for your book. I hope I get to see you in person someday so you can sign it for me. Uh, and thank you to everyone that has tuned in tonight. Tonight we have the Insta tuck in. So you tuck yourself in, make sure to take your pictures. You guys got to check out. I mean, Shelby's in her PJs. I'm in my PJs. I still have a few more hours here and I'm super excited because I'm treating myself. I'm getting my favorite pizza tonight. So I'm like really, really excited about that. So that's happening next and it's going to happen early because it's only 5 p.m. here. Before we close, I just want to hear a little bit from you as closing thoughts on self-care, which is a very hot topic. And so we had a quote last weekend from Connor, whose story sharing session he said that self-care for him starts with self-awareness, that he needs to know what he needs before he can like even advocate for it from his own life. So,
That.
one final thought on self-care. How do you prioritize yourself and what you need? Do you like that term? Do you not like it? Just tell us your thoughts.
It's like I think self-care is one of those things where sometimes it's like it's taken too far, right? It's like sometimes they're just basic needs that you need, right? So sometimes you need to sleep. Like these are things that you just need to do. But I always liken it, and it's so cliche, but I always liken it to that oh wait, excuse me, when you're in an airplane and the oxygen comes down, you have to put on your mask first. If you're not good for yourself, I mean, I will be no good to my patients. I'll be no good to my family. I'll be like that. So I make the things that I know that make me a better person just day to day, getting enough sleep. For me, exercise, which I figured out 12, 13 years ago, that helps to regulate me a lot. Like I need to make those things a priority in my life. And I know there are days that I won't get it in, but that's my lifeline. And that will help me be a better person in the whole wide world. And it's not selfish. I mean, I've seen that quote all over the place recently. Self-care is not selfish, but it's true. It will just make you better to everyone else to help and do what you need to do in your life. Prioritize yourself.
Well, perfect. Perfect last words. Thank you so much, Shelby, again. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone, for
Julie. This was so much fun.
tuning in. And we will continue with the sleep in activities, folks. I'll see you again, I guess, tomorrow. We have yoga in the morning. So I mean, I'm not going to be, you're not going to see me doing yoga. I'll just be doing it though. And then we have a very cool panel about sleep in your space. And different, your environment and thinking about it from an architecture perspective and a biology perspective and a population health perspective. So, oh my God, we got all the
That's
perspectives
awesome.
coming. Yep, it's gonna be
That's
cool. And we'll see you guys again tomorrow then. Thank you.
Right, everyone.
All right, bye for now. Thanks, Dr. Harris.
Thank you. Bye, Julie.
Well, guys, bye.